Joe Biden heads to Middle East amid faltering U.S. sway. Joe Biden might prefer not to have visited the Middle East this week, or any other week for that matter. His agenda is full. The president's Democratic Party colleagues in the U.S. Congress look to be heading for a bruising result in November's midterm elections. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has touched off the most serious confrontation between the world's biggest nuclear-armed powers since the height of the Cold War. China is looking keenly for signs of American decline, as its own inexorable rise to global power moves forward. To make matters worse, President Biden's own previous visits to the Middle East have shown the limits of American power. When he visited Jerusalem as Barack Obama's vice president, he was humiliated by the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he called for a freeze on Israel's settlement projects for Jews in the occupied territories, which are illegal under international law. He's visiting Israel and spending a few hours in the occupied Palestinian territories, before heading to Saudi Arabia, where he will join a summit of leaders of the Gulf, along with those of Jordan, Egypt and Iraq. President Biden is traveling because of the depth and complexity of the crises he is trying to grip. The Russian-Ukrainian war has banished the last hopes of a peaceful future that followed the end of the Cold War more than 30 years ago. Its economic fallout might cost him when Americans vote, and the fault line between friends of America and friends of Iran in the Middle East is heating up again. If it moves from threats and covert confrontation to another hot war, it will be every bit as dangerous and destabilizing as Russia's war in Ukraine. Loss of trust. Politically, President Biden's trip might turn into another reminder of America's decline as an influencer in the Middle East. Mr. Biden will call, once again, for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, the so-called two-state solution. He knows it will still be as far away as ever when he leaves. Mr. Biden has, however, restored cuts in American funding to Palestinians. More awkwardly, he is going to ask the Saudis for a very big favor, to produce more oil and sell it at a lower price. The economic dislocation that followed the invasion of Ukraine left the U.S., just like the rest of the world, with high energy prices, even though they are no longer dependent on oil imports from the Gulf. The blunt political truth for Mr. Biden is that every cent on a gallon of petrol in the United States loses more votes for his Democrats at the midterm elections. An American request to the Saudis is an awkward moment, for all the billions the Saudis spent on weapons. The Saudis stopped trusting Washington when President Obama unceremoniously dumped Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak in 2011 after a couple of weeks of street protests. If they can do that to a faithful friend, they reasoned, they can do it to anyone. Saudi suspicion of America deepened when President Biden, in one of his first actions on taking office, published a U.S. intelligence report that concluded that the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was responsible for the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed and dismembered when he went to pick up some official papers at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. The Saudis denied the accusations. When Mr. Biden was running for president, he said Saudi Arabia was a pariah state, murdering its critics and imprisoning many other prominent dissidents. The Saudis do not believe they owe the U.S. president any favors. To the embarrassment of some of his supporters, Mr. Biden is preparing to swallow his words. Presidents of the United States do not usually visit states they condemn as pariahs. The Americans have an ambitious and still vague set of ideas aimed at forcing Russia into selling its oil at a lower price. Oil and gas revenues have flowed into Moscow's treasury despite Western sanctions imposed after the invasion.